I keep 2 sets of books in my head at all times. One is my life as my in-laws see it. A 31-year-old woman who married their son, quit a real job, and now works from a spare bedroom in yoga pants. The other is my actual life, which I am not allowed to talk about. Not at Christmas, not at Easter, not at the 4th of July barbecue, where my mother-in-law stands at the grill in a monogrammed apron and tells anyone who will listen that her son married a girl who never quite figured herself out. Last Thanksgiving, she finally pushed hard enough to find out exactly who I am. I pulled into their driveway at noon. My car, a 6-year-old Subaru with a cracked bumper and a parking permit from a federal building that my mother-in-law had once called depressing, sat beside my brother-in-law's brand new F-350 and my sister-in-law's Range Rover like a sparrow wedged between 2 eagles. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment with the engine off, doing the thing I always do before I walk into that house. I breathed through my nose 4 counts, out through my mouth 4 counts. It's not a wellness technique. It's a decompression protocol, the kind you use when you're moving from one operational environment to another. My husband was already inside. He'd driven up the night before for some pre-holiday thing with his father that I had diplomatically declined. He knew I would need that extra 12 hours. The front door opened before I reached the porch. There she is, my mother-in-law said, framing herself in the doorway the way she always does, like she's posing for the cover of a magazine that doesn't exist anymore. She's 62. She dresses like she's 50 and acts like she's 35, and is perpetually disappointed in everyone around her for failing to keep up. She looked at my coat, practical, navy, no belt, and her smile did that thing where the corners stayed up, but the warmth went out completely. "We thought you got lost. Traffic on I-66, I said. On a holiday." She said it like it was a character flaw. The house smelled of roasting turkey and something expensive from a candle that probably cost $40 and was named after a season. My mother-in-law ushered me through the foyer, past the gallery wall of framed family photos. Every achievement of every family member displayed in chronological order like a museum of their own excellence, and into the living room where the rest of them had gathered. My brother-in-law, Garrett, was holding court by the fireplace. He is 34, broad-shouldered, the kind of loud that fills a room and makes people think something interesting is happening, when actually he's just talking about his truck. He works in commercial real estate and makes an amount of money that his mother mentions whenever she can find a natural opening, and sometimes when she can't. He had a bourbon in his hand at noon, which my mother-in-law calls festive, and which, if I had done it, she would have called something else entirely. My husband crossed the room and kissed my cheek. "You okay?" he murmured. "Fine," I said. He knows what that means. After 6 years of marriage, he has learned to read my fines the way air traffic controllers read weather patterns. This particular fine meant, "I am operational. Do not draw attention to me." My sister-in-law, Marcy, was curled into the corner of the sectional with her phone, doing something on Instagram that her mother loudly approved of, because Marcy has 14,000 followers and once got a free blender from a brand partnership, which my mother-in-law has described on at least 3 separate occasions as basically the same as having a job. I found a seat near the window and accepted a glass of sparkling water from someone. The interrogation started about 4 minutes later, right on schedule. "So," my mother-in-law said, settling into her chair the way a judge settles onto a bench, "what have you been up to lately? You're still doing the consulting thing?" She has never been able to say consulting without a pause before it. The pause does a lot of work. It carries the full weight of her skepticism, her disappointment, her belief that consulting is what people call it when they have nothing real to say. "Still consulting, yes," I said. "And that keeps you busy?" She tilted her head. The smile was patient. The patience was not genuine. "Busy enough." Garrett looked up from his bourbon. "What exactly do you consult on?" Like, what does that mean on a day-to-day basis? I've been asked this question 100 times. I have 100 versions of the answer, scaled to the situation. For cocktail parties, risk analysis. For family dinners, I help organizations think through complicated problems. For my mother-in-law, it's complicated. It varies, I said. Garrett made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. You should come work with me. Real estate, you can actually see what you're doing. You close a deal, there's a building, tangible. I can't imagine doing something where you can't even explain what you do. I can explain it, I said pleasantly. I just choose not to. That landed in the room like a small stone in a still pond. My mother-in-law's smile went fixed. She's always been mysterious, my mother-in-law said to the room, like I wasn't there. Even when she and my son were dating, she'd come for dinner and barely say a word. I used to wonder if she was just shy. She paused. Now I think it's a bit of a performance. My husband's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He didn't say anything. He has been managing the space between us and his family for 6 years, and he is very tired, and I don't blame him for any of it. But on that particular afternoon, I felt the familiar ache of being alone in a room full of people who are supposed to be my family. Dinner was the production it always is. My mother-in-law roasted a 22-pound turkey that she'd been brining since Monday. She made 4 kinds of pie. The table was set with the good china, which comes out 4 times a year and involves a level of preparation usually reserved for federal summits. Place cards, a centerpiece of autumn leaves and white candles that she'd seen on Pinterest and spent an afternoon recreating. She put my husband at the head of the table, his father's traditional seat, which his father no longer occupies due to a divorce 12 years ago that the family discusses in the same tones used for weather and market fluctuations. She put Garrett to her right, Marcy beside him, my husband's younger cousin from Richmond beside Marcy, and me, across from my mother-in-law, directly in her sightline, which I had learned over the years was either an honor or a tactical position depending on her mood. The turkey was carved, the wine was poured. Garrett told a story about a property deal in McLean that had netted him a commission he mentioned twice, the second time with a specific number. My mother-in-law beamed. She is never more at ease than when her son is succeeding loudly enough for everyone to hear. Then she looked at me. I was talking to Patricia Hammond at the club last week, she said. Her daughter just made partner at Morrison's Forster. 32 years old. Can you imagine? She reached across and refilled my wine glass, a gesture that looked like generosity and was not. I always thought you had that kind of potential when you were in law school. Before you left, I did not leave law school. I finished law school. I passed the bar. I practiced for 2 years at a firm in D.C. before I accepted a position that required me to pass a background investigation so thorough that investigators interviewed my college roommate's neighbor. But I can't say any of that, so what I said was, I'm happy with what I'm doing, happy. She echoed the word back to me the same way she'd echoed consulting. Well, that's something, she turned to Garrett. Did I tell you Patricia's daughter is getting married in the spring? Big wedding at the Hay Adams. The conversation moved on. I ate my turkey. It was good turkey. I'll give her that. The second front opened over dessert. We were on the pumpkin pie when my mother-in-law circled back with the particular precision of someone who had been planning this since at least the salad course. She'd had 2 glasses of the good Burgundy by then, which didn't make her mean. She didn't need help with that, but it did make her less careful about the packaging. I just worry, she said, to no one specifically and therefore to everyone, that you don't have anything to show for yourself. At your age, she gestured vaguely in my direction. No trajectory. You know what I mean? Garrett has her platform. Even my son, she smiled at my husband, has his practice. And you have. She trailed off, tilting her head, waiting for me to fill the blank with something she could evaluate. I have my work, I said. But what does it add up to? What are you building? My husband set down his fork. Mom, I'm asking a genuine question. She spread her hands, the picture of reasonableness. I'm not being critical. I'm asking what the plan is. You're 31. These are the years that matter. If you don't have something concrete to point to by the time you're 40. She has plenty to point to, my husband said, and I felt a wave of love for him so sharp it almost hurt. Like what? Garrett said. Not maliciously, exactly. Garrett is less malicious than he is simply thoughtless, which in some ways is worse. No offense. I just mean, what do you actually do? Because every time I ask, I get a different non-answer. The table had gone quiet. My husband's cousin was looking at her plate. Marcy was looking at her phone, which I suspected was not actually doing anything but providing cover. I looked at my mother-in-law. She was watching me with an expression I had seen 1,000 times across 1,000 family dinners. Patient, superior, just concerned enough to be unchallengeable. I thought about my father. He died when I was 16, a Tuesday in November, the kind of cold gray day that settles into the bones and doesn't leave. He had been a systems engineer for a defense contractor for 22 years, and he had never once talked about his work at dinner. Not because he couldn't, but because he understood that the weight of what he knew was not something you brought to the table with the pot roast. He used to say, "The most important work in the world is the work nobody knows about." I used to think that was something modest people said. It took me 15 years to understand he was telling me his actual job description. He would have hated this dinner. He would have sat in his chair and said nothing, and my mother-in-law would have mistaken his silence for weakness the same way she'd been mistaking mine. "I'm going to say something," I said quietly, "and I want everyone at this table to understand that I'm saying it calmly and without any particular edge." My mother-in-law blinked. The table stilled. I don't talk about my work at family dinners because I'm not permitted to. Not because it's embarrassing. Not because there's nothing there. Because there are legal and contractual reasons that I cannot discuss the specifics of what I do with people who don't have the appropriate clearance to receive that information. Garrett let out a short sound, half laugh, half disbelief. Clearance? Like, what, you're like CIA or something? I didn't say that, but I said I'm not permitted to discuss it. I looked at him. That is a different thing from not having anything to discuss. The room was quiet in a different way now. My husband had gone very still. He knows the broad outlines of what I do. He signed a form when we got engaged. He has never once pushed past what I'm allowed to tell him, because he understands that there are things I carry alone, and he respects that, and it is one of the reasons I love him. My mother-in-law made a small sound. It was somewhere between a laugh and a scoff, which is a sound she has perfected over many years. "Well," she said, "I think that's a very creative way to avoid the question." She reached for her wine. Clearance. My goodness. She looked around the table, collecting allies. "You know, I've met plenty of government workers over the years. Nice people, very steady." She smiled at me, nothing to be embarrassed about. "I'm not embarrassed," I said. "Of course not." She set down her glass. "But let's be honest, sweetheart. If you were doing something that mattered, something genuinely important, there would be some indication of it. A title, a promotion, something to show. Success leaves footprints." She nodded toward Garrett. "People know when you've accomplished something real." My husband said her name, a warning. She ignored it. "I'm just saying," she continued, turning the knife slowly, "that mystery is easy. Substance is harder. And from where I'm sitting, after 6 years of watching, you drift through holidays and dinners and conversations without a single concrete answer about your life. I have to wonder whether the secrecy is protecting something real, or whether it's protecting the idea that there's something real." She paused. "I say this because I love you, and because I think you're capable of more than you're allowing yourself to be." There it was, the kindest, cruelest thing, the thing she always saved for when the wine was right and the audience was assembled. I had swallowed this before, every Christmas, every Easter, every Thanksgiving for 6 years. I had sat in this chair and taken the measured, well-packaged condescension and filed it away in the same mental cabinet where I filed hostile briefings and bad intelligence, and every other thing I wasn't allowed to react to in the moment. But she had said it in front of my husband, in front of his cousin, who was 24 and impressionable and watching everything, in front of Garrett, who would carry it back to his wife and his golf buddies, and his network of people who made things tangible and showed their receipts. And she had called it love. My husband's cousin, the 24-year-old from Richmond, had a particular look on her face, not the polite blankness of the others. She was leaning forward very slightly, watching me with something that I recognized after a moment as specific attention. I'd seen it before, in certain people, in certain rooms. The look of someone who knows how to be quiet and use their ears. Her name was Petra. She'd graduated the year before from University of Virginia. She'd been interning somewhere in DC that summer that she hadn't been specific about. I had noticed her at a few of these family events and thought more than once that there was something she wasn't saying. She was watching me now the way someone watches a test they know the answer to. I looked at my mother-in-law. She was satisfied. The verdict had been delivered, and she was already moving toward the next subject, reaching for the pie server, the matter closed. "I'm going to step outside for a minute," I said. I walked through the kitchen and out the back door into the cold. The yard was November bare, the old oak at the back dropping the last of its leaves onto the brown grass. I stood on the patio with my arms crossed and breathed the clean air and looked at the sky, which was the flat pewter color of a classified document header. I thought about the morning 3 weeks earlier when I had been in a conference room on the 4th floor of a building that I will not name in a city I'm allowed to say is Washington, and I had presented a geospatial risk analysis to a room of 14 people, 2 of whom are names you would recognize from the news. The analysis had taken me 11 weeks to prepare. It had directly informed a policy decision affecting treaty negotiations in a region I'm not going to specify. When I walked out of that room, no one shook my hand. No one took a photo. There was no press release. I drove home, made pasta, and watched half an episode of something on Netflix before falling asleep on the couch. The back door opened behind me. It was Petra. She stood in the doorway for a moment, then stepped out onto the patio and pulled the door closed behind her. She had a glass of water and a look on her face like someone coming to a meeting they've been thinking about for a while. "Sorry about her," she said. "You don't have to apologize for her." "I know." She paused. "Can I ask you something?" I looked at her. "You can ask, when did you start? Because I'm trying to figure out the timing of things." I studied her face. She held my gaze without flinching, without performing. There was a particular quality to her stillness that I had only seen in a specific kind of person. "I can't answer that," I said carefully. She nodded once. "I figured." She looked out at the yard. "I started my rotation in August. It's been—" She paused, searching for a word. "Disorienting. When you go home and people ask what you're doing and you can't say anything real." I was very still. "I'm not asking you to confirm anything," Petra said quickly. I'm having a hard time with the family stuff. My mom keeps telling people I'm in government like it's something to apologize for." She let out a short breath. "I'm sorry, this is weird." "I'm being weird." "You're not being weird," I said. "You're being 24 and new to something that takes a while to figure out." She looked at me. "Did it take you a while?" "It took me years," I said honestly, "to be comfortable with it, to stop feeling like I had to justify the silence." She nodded slowly. The oak tree dropped a leaf. It spiraled down through the cold air and landed in the dead grass without a sound. "How do you handle evenings like this?" she asked. I thought about my father. I thought about his quiet at the dinner table, the way he listened to everything and said almost nothing, and the way that had always made my mother feel safe, even when she didn't know why. "You remember why you do it," I said, "and you let the noise be noise." The back door opened again. My husband leaned out, looking between the two of us, with the careful expression of a man who has learned to assess a situation before commenting on it. "Everything okay out here?" "We're good," I said. He looked at me for a moment. Whatever he saw settled him. He nodded and went back inside. Petra and I stood in the cold for another minute, not talking, looking at the gray sky. It was companionable. It was the particular ease of people who speak the same unspoken language. "You should come back in," I said finally, "before she sends someone else." Petra almost smiled. "She's going to ask me what we were talking about. Tell her we were discussing real estate." She did smile then, quick and genuine. "Got it." We went back inside. The table had moved on. The pie was half eaten. Garrett was telling a story about a house in Great Falls with a wine cellar that he seemed to find more moving than most people find their wedding days. My mother-in-law was laughing at something Marcy had shown her on her phone. The air had shifted the way it shifts after a storm passes, not resolved, exactly, but different. I sat back down at my place. My husband passed me the pie without being asked. I took a piece and ate it, and it was very good pie, and I let the conversation roll around me like water around a stone. My mother-in-law caught my eye across the table at one point. She had the look of someone who was recalibrating something, though she would never say so. She had said her piece, and she would file it away as concern and revisit it next Easter. After dinner in the kitchen, Garrett found me loading dishes into the dishwasher. He was carrying his empty bourbon glass and looking slightly loosened, the way he always looks once the food is done and the performance of the meal is over. "Hey," he said. "I hope the stuff at dinner wasn't. I was just curious. I didn't mean it like she did." "I know," I said. "I just genuinely don't understand what you do." "I know that too," I said. I put another plate in the rack. "Garrett, if I told you what I do, you wouldn't disbelieve me. You'd just have to forget it. And that's not a comfortable position to be in." He looked at me for a long moment. There was something moving across his face that I don't usually see there. Something quieter than his usual register. Is it important? What you do?" I considered the room in that building 3 weeks ago. The 14 people. The map on the wall. The policy decision that would affect people in a country far from this kitchen. "Yes," I said simply. He nodded. Something seemed to settle in him. Not understanding, exactly. More like a willingness to stop requiring it. "Cool," he said, which was probably the most honest thing he'd said all day. He refilled his glass and went back to the living room. I finished the dishes alone and looked out the kitchen window at the dark backyard, the old oaks standing black against the slate sky. I thought about what my mother-in-law had said, that success leaves footprints, that mystery is easy and substance is harder. She was not entirely wrong. Substance is harder. What she doesn't know, what she can't know, is that the hardest kind of substance is the kind that doesn't leave footprints. The kind of work that is measured not in bylines or commissions or follower counts, but in things that did not happen. Catastrophes that were prevented. Decisions that were made correctly in windowless rooms at 3 a.m. by people who will never be thanked for them. My father knew. He spent 22 years doing exactly that and came home every night and helped with homework and grilled chicken on Sundays, and never once suggested that his silence made him less than anyone who was louder. He understood that the architecture of a safe country is built in quiet, by people whose names will never be on the blueprints. I understood it too. I had just needed this dinner to remind me that I'd stopped apologizing for it somewhere in the last few years without quite noticing when. My husband appeared in the kitchen doorway. He watched me watching the dark yard. "Ready to go," he said. 5 minutes, I said. He came and stood beside me at the window. We looked at the oak tree together, After a moment, he put his arm around my shoulders. She doesn't know, he said quietly. Not an excuse. A fact. I know she doesn't. Someday, maybe. No, I said gently. Not someday. That's not how it works. He was quiet for a moment. Does it bother you? I thought about it, honestly. It had bothered me for years. The accumulated weight of all those dinners, all those well-meaning devastations, all that patience spent absorbing insults that I couldn't answer with the truth. There had been a time when I drove home from this house in tears, when I sat in the parking lot of a CVS on Route 7 and cried until I could breathe again. I didn't do that anymore. Less than it used to, I said. He pulled me slightly closer. For what it's worth, he said, I know. I know enough of it. And I think he paused. He's not a man who uses big words for things. I think what you do matters. I think you matter. I don't need to know the details to know that. I stood there in the warm kitchen while the cold settled outside against the window glass, and I thought about Petra standing in the yard asking how to carry the silence, and I thought about 14 people in a room making a decision, and I thought about my father's quiet at the dinner table, and I thought about my mother-in-law across the china and the candlelight delivering her verdict like it was care. I thought, she built a life of beautiful noise, and I built something that doesn't make any sound at all. And both of us believe, down to the bone, that we chose correctly. The difference is that I know what I'm protecting. She's protecting a story about herself. That is not her fault. It is just the difference between us. It always has been. Let's say goodbye, I said. We went back into the living room. I hugged my mother-in-law, who hugged me back with the same careful warmth she always uses, like she's calibrating the exact right temperature. I hugged Marcy, who told me I should check out Sutfent, a supplement she'd been trying. I shook Garrett's hand, which he seemed slightly moved by, though he would not have been able to say why. Petra caught my eye by the front door. She didn't say anything. She gave me the smallest nod, barely perceptible, the kind that communicates everything and nothing simultaneously. I nodded back. My husband and I drove home in comfortable silence. The highway was empty, the way it only is on Thanksgiving. The whole country briefly paused. The dashboard lights were low and warm. I had one hand on the window and watched the dark Virginia landscape roll past, the tree lines and the exits, and the occasional overpass lit in orange. After a while, my husband said, she's going to keep doing this, every Christmas, every Easter, until one of us dies or moves to another country. I know, I said. How do you want to handle it? I thought about it. I thought about Petra's question in the cold yard, about how to carry the silence and about what I had told her. You remember why you do it, and you let the noise be noise. The same way I always have, I said, quietly. He reached over and took my hand on the center console. He didn't say anything else. We drove the rest of the way home in the dark, the road ahead lit by our headlights, everything else invisible and irrelevant, and I felt something I recognized after a moment as peace. Not the kind you achieve and keep forever, but the kind you choose again and again, at the end of every loud dinner, at the beginning of every quiet drive home. My work will never have a byline. My name will not be on any building. There will be no toast at Christmas to what I have accomplished, because what I have accomplished cannot be said out loud in a room with good wine and good china. But somewhere tonight, because of choices made in windowless rooms by people like me and Petra, and the ones who came before us, a family in a house I will never see is sitting down to their own dinner, without knowing what they were protected from. They are arguing about football or complaining about the sweet potatoes or laughing at something the youngest child said. They are safe. They don't know my name. They don't need to.